As Professor Nevern led the way down the rune-lit corridor, Raiskin quickened his step to walk beside the tall boy. "I'm Raiskin," he said, offering a hand and a genuine smile. The boy's eyes lit up with relief, and he shook it firmly. "Tavern Greethorn," he replied, his Waterhavian accent softened by a hint of country. "Glad to be grouped with someone who doesn't look ready to faint." Raiskin grinned. "I was just hiding it well. This place is incredible." Tavern smirked, glancing over his shoulder at the shifting walls. "My father always said Blackstaff's halls change more often than the city's politics. I'm hoping to specialize in abjuration, but I'll try not to set anything on fire, unless it's meant to be." Miranelle joined them, her earlier nerves fading as she caught the mood. "If you do set something on fire, at least warn me so I can try an illusion to hide it." The three exchanged quick, conspiratorial laughs. Ahead, Professor Nevern paused at a tall oaken door etched with stars. "Your journey at Blackstaff truly begins now," he intoned, opening the door to reveal a classroom bathed in shifting, spectral light. Raiskin felt the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary dissolve with every step. Raiskin stepped eagerly into the classroom, his heart thudding as shifting spectral lights danced across the high-vaulted ceiling and book-lined walls. The air vibrated with latent magic. Chalk symbols gleamed on the slate, and an array of arcane instruments, crystal globes, brass astrolabes, and rune-etched mirrors, stood on tables around the room. At the front, Professor Nevern gestured for the students to take their seats at curved wooden desks arranged in a semicircle. Tavern slid into a chair beside Raiskin, with Miranelle settling on his other side. Their group of three seemed small against the grandeur of the chamber, but Raiskin felt a sense of belonging. Professor Nevern's voice cut through the away. "Today, you are fortunate. Professor Thalarin, one of the Academy's foremost conjurers, will demonstrate a classic summoning. Watch closely. Theory is important, but magic takes courage and focus." The door at the far end opened, and in strode Professor Caloring, a tall, severe-looking male elf with sharp features, clad in deep green robes embroidered with silver stars. He placed a heavy, leather-bound tome on the lectern and nodded to the gathered students. "We begin with the fundamentals of conjuration, but magic is never without risk." A hush fell. Raiskin's skin prickled with anticipation as Professor Toleran drew the first sigil in glowing chalk. The air seemed to tremble, a prelude to the fateful demonstration that would soon alter the course of Raiskin's life forever. Raiskin leaned forward, eyes fixed on Professor Caloran's every movement. The elf's gestures were precise, his voice low and resonant as he intoned the ancient words. Lines of glowing chalk formed a complex circle on the slate, while the air itself seemed to hum in response. Raiskin's mind raced to memorize the pattern of each arc, each rune, the subtle flourish of Thalaran's wrist. A summoning, when performed correctly, Thalaran lectured, is a negotiation with the boundaries between worlds. Even the smallest miscalculation can invite the unexpected. He reached for a silver rod and tapped it against a crystal orb, which flared with inner light. The room grew tense, all students silent, watching the demonstration unfold. Raiskin felt magic gathering, thick and expectant, as Thalaran began the final chant. The runes blazed brighter, Then, with a sudden crackle, the air split open in a shimmer of violet and black. Energy swirled, unstable, and for a heartbeat, Raiskin's vision blurred. Something cold and ancient brushed against his thoughts. A whisper not meant for mortal minds. As quickly as it came, the sensation faded. Professor Thallerin staggered, blinking in surprise, the summoning circle flickering wildly before settling. No creature stood within the ring, only the lingering sense that something had slipped, unseen, into the world. Raiskin shivered, his heart pounding with awe and fear. With trembling hands, Raiskin slipped his journal from the folds of his robe, careful to keep it hidden beneath the desk. He began to sketch the sigil from memory, marking every angle and rune with swift, anxious strokes. His notes spilled onto the paging, the sharp scent of ozone, the pulse of magic, the chilling touch in his mind, like a shadow brushing candlelight, something ancient, something watching. As he wrote, he glanced up to see Professor Thallerin regaining his composure. The elf's eyes scanned the circle, lips pressed tight, but he offered no explanation for the failed summoning. Around Raiskin, whispers snaked between students, some excited, some afraid. Miranel clutched her notebook, would prove to pale, while Tavern shot Raiskin a questioning look. Raiskin quickly closed his journal, tracing a cantrip to lock it with a whispered word. He wasn't sure if what he'd felt was real, or just the thrill of being so close to powerful magic. But deep inside, a trace of that icy presence lingered, a whisper whose meaning he could not quite grasp, yet could not forget. Professor Thallerin cleared his throat. Let this remind you, even the simplest spell can spiral beyond your control. We will discuss the theory, but first, does anyone have questions about what you witnessed? Raiskin leaned toward Miranel and Tavern, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you feel that? When the circle flared, something cold, like a shadow in my head. Miranel's hands trembled on her notebook. Yes, she murmured, eyes wide with unease. It was like a presence. I thought it was just me, but it felt wrong. Like something waiting. Tavern frowned, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected to see the source lurking nearby. I felt it too. I've seen botched conjurations before, but never anything like that. It was as if the magic was watching us back. His face was pale, the bravado from earlier gone. As Professor Thallerin began to answer a question from another student, Raiskin realized that whatever had touched them had not been meant for the whole class. It had singled out a few. The knowledge sent a chill through him, and the whisper of Malachur's presence seemed to flicker at the edge of his thoughts, promising more secrets yet to come. Raiskin kept his head down, forcing himself to look attentive as Professor Thallerin returned to the theory of conjuration. His mind, however, was already racing ahead. He needed answers. About the sigil, the failed summoning, and the icy presence that still lingered in his thoughts. He resolved to visit the library after class, certain that somewhere in the Academy's labyrinthine stacks there must be a record of mishaps like this one. Miranel and Tavern said little, but the three shared a silent understanding. Each of them had felt the same wrongness, and each seemed to realize that the solution would not come asking in front of the entire class. Raiskin's fingers itched to turn the pages of old tomes, to compare notes and sigils, to find some explanation that would fit the cold brush of alien magic he'd experienced. Professor Thalloran, still a shade more pale than before, continued the lesson, but Raiskin barely heard the words. The promise of the library's secrets called to him, and beneath that, the faint echo of Malacher's whisper seemed to urge him on. Perhaps, he thought, the knowledge would be the only shield against this shadow. The bell rang, dismissing the class. Raiskin gathered his things, eyes already scanning for the quickest way to the library, and for any sign that Malachar's influence had left a mark on more than just his mind. Before heading to the library, Raiskin slipped away from the flow of students and found a secluded alcove near a stained glass window. The sunlight filtered through colored panes, casting a shifting pattern of gold and blue onto the stone floor. Here, the bustle of the academy seemed distant, be a stranger, muffled by the thick walls and the hush of ancient magic. He opened his journal and began to write, pouring his memory of the summoning onto the page, the shape and glow of the sigil, the taste of ozone, the cold brush in his mind, and the shared fear in Morano's and Tavern's eyes. He wrote not just what he saw, but what he felt, an unease that ran deeper than nerves or awe. He described the sense of being watched, and to be a stranger, and the whisper that seemed to echo just beyond understanding Malachar. As he finished, Raiskin paused to steady his trembling hand. It was one thing to witness a magical mishap, another to record it and see the pattern of dread laid out in ink. He realized, with a chill, that this was not just a student's curiosity. He was already caught up in something much larger, something the Academy's routines could not contain. Resolute, Raiskin closed his journal, secured it with his cantrip, and stood. The library's secrets awaited, and he would not rest until he understood what shadow had brushed his soul. The corridors grew quieter as Raiskin made his way to the library, his steps echoing off marble and flagstone. The vast doors stood slightly ajar, revealing rows of towering bookcases and banners depicting legendary mages. Inside, the scent of ancient parchment mingled with the faint tingle of protective wards. He entered alone, determined, his journal clutched close beneath his robe. Choosing a secluded table in a shadowed corner, he set down his things and scanned the stacks for clues and tomes of conjuration theory, records of magical mishaps, and, most hopefully, any mention of Malachar. The silence was broken only by the scratch of his pen as he noted book titles and the distant whisper of turning pages from unseen scholars. Raiskin's search yielded frustratingly little at first. Texts on summoning warned of planar breaches and entities best left unnamed, but none described a presence quite like the one he'd felt. Still buried in a brittle, dust-covered ledger of Academy incidents, he found a reference to a Malachar the Watcher, a spirit summoned by accident over a century ago, its influence described as lingering, cold, and hungry. A chill ran through him as he realized his suspicions were true. What had touched his mind had a name, and it had haunted Blackstaff's halls before. Raiskin's resolve hardened. He would keep searching, no matter the risk, until he learned how to protect himself and his friends from Malachar's shadow. Raiskin delved deeper into the library's shadowed stacks, the hush broken only by the faint hum of magical wards and the whisper of parchment. He searched for references to the century-old incident, scouring indexes, incident logs, and forbidden compendiums. Eventually, he uncovered a brittle, leather-bound tome, Anomalous Planar Breaches in Blackstaff History. Within its yellowing pages, he found a chilling account. Malachor the Watcher had been summoned by a student named Idrin Felist in 184 DR. The spirit had not manifested physically, but its influence had lingered. Edrin reported dreams of cold darkness, whispers that grew more insistent, and a slow erosion of his will. The entry ended abruptly, with a noting, "Case transferred to the Blackstaff's personal attention. Results sealed by order of Randall I." Raiskin's heart pounded as he realized the parallels, the sense of being watched, the whispering presence, the absence of a corporeal form. He was reliving Idrin's fate. Worse, the lack of a resolution in the records suggested the Academy had never truly banished Malachar. He copied the details into his journal, hands shaking. He had to warn Miranil and Tavern and perhaps, if he dared, seek out the Blackstaff himself. Somewhere, Malachar's cold gaze was fixed on him, and the true danger might only just be beginning. Raiskin hurried from the library, his journal hugged tight to his chest, searching the bustling halls for any sign of Miranil or Tavern. He found them near the courtyard fountain, their heads bent in quiet conversation. As soon as he approached, both looked up. Miranil's eyes wide with concern, Tavern's jaw set in grim anticipation. Raiskin spoke in a low, urgent voice, sharing what he'd discovered. Idrin Felist, the sealed records, the chilling parallels to their own experience. With every word, the anxiety in his friends' faces deepened. If the Blackstaff himself got involved and the records were sealed, Tavern whispered, then we could be in real danger. "We have to do something," Miranil said, her voice trembling yet resolute. If Malachar wasn't banished before, he might still be here, waiting for another chance. The three drew closer, forming a small circle of trust amid the wider world of the Academy. The question now was not just how to protect themselves, but whether to risk bringing their fears to a professor, or to keep searching for answers on their own, before the shadow grew any deeper. Raiskin, Miranil, and Tavern sat together on the edge of the fountain, voices hushed as a pact of secrecy passed between them. "No professors," Tavern insisted, his brow furrowed. "If the Blackstaff sealed the records, we might get expelled, or worse, if we start asking the wrong questions." Miranil nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "We stick together. We learn what we can before we trust anyone else. If Malachar is still here, we'll find a way to protect ourselves." With grim determination, the trio agreed to share every scrap of knowledge and watch one another for signs of the spirit's influence. Their next steps were clear: more research, more vigilance, and a promise to meet every evening in a hidden alcove to compare notes and comfort each other should the darkness whisper again. As the sun dipped behind the Academy's towers, Raiskin felt the weight of their secret settle over his shoulders. The Academy's ancient stones seemed to press in, and the shadow of Malachar lingered at the edge of his thoughts, waiting and patient. Their quest had become more than an academic mystery. It was a fight for their very souls. As dusk deepened, the trio slipped from the courtyard, moving quietly through the torch-lit halls. Raiskin led the way to the library's seldom used eastern wing, where dust motes danced in the golden light, and the shelves grew wild with forgotten lore. A velvet rope, marked with a faded sigil of warning, barred their path, but Tavern produced a small knife and deftly slipped it free. Myronal cast a nervous illusion to blur their presence, while Raiskin's heart hammered with dread and excitement. Inside the forbidden stacks, the air was cooler, tinged with the scent of old magic and secrets best left undisturbed. The shelves here groaned under the weight of tomes bound in cracked leather and sealed with tarnished clasps. They found books on spirit banishments, failed exorcisms, and the whispered names of spirits that had haunted the academy through the ages. At last, Raiskin's trembling hand closed on a volume titled Wards Against the Watchered Countermeasures and Consequences. They huddled together, poring over the text in the flickering lamplight. The rituals described were complex and dangerous, requiring rare components, mental discipline, and, most of all, trust. A single misstep could draw Malachur's gaze even closer. "If we try this," Miranel whispered, "we may be risking more than we know. But if we don't, he could take us one by one." A distant footfall echoed down the corridor. A teacher or a prefect, perhaps. The trio froze, torn between flight and the desperate need for answers. The forbidden knowledge was now within reach, but so was discovery, and whatever punishment or danger might come with it. Miranel's illusion shimmered, cloaking the trio in a ripple of distortion as Raiskin slipped the heavy tome back behind a row of untouched grime-mares. Tavern replaced the velvet rope, erasing any sign of their trespass. They moved quickly and quietly, holding their breath as the footsteps came closer. An older student in prefect's robes strolled past the main aisle, pausing just long enough to make their hearts race before continuing on. Once the danger had passed, the group retreated to their usual alcove, adrenaline still pounding. Raiskin's mind buzzed with the fragments they'd glimpsing, the ingredients for the ritual, the diagram of the ward, the dire warnings about drawing a spirit's focus. "We'll need to come back," he whispered, "but we can't risk it tonight." Miranel chewed her lip, eyes darting nervously. "We'll need to gather the components and memorize the ritual first. If we're caught, we'll lose everything, and Malachar will know we're afraid." The three exchanged solemn nods. For now, secrecy was their best defense. But as the last light faded from the library windows, Raiskin felt the weight of forbidden knowledge pressing down, a sense that Malachar's gaze was growing sharper with every step they took toward the truth. The next day, Raiskin, Miranel, and Tavern began discreetly asking older students about unusual happenings in the academy's past. They approached a group of fourth years in the mess hall, framing their curiosity as a search for good ghost stories to scare first years. The older students exchanged knowing glances and traded Talus's strained cold spots in the East Tower, shadowy figures glimpsed in the archives, and a chilling legend about the Watcher on the stairs, who haunted students who lingered too late in the library. One student, a tall, self-possessed girl with silver hair named Lirali, caught Raiskin's attention. "Most of the stories are nonsense," she said, her eyes studying him with a keen intelligence. "But if you're asking about the real dangers, you'd do better to avoid the East Wing after sunset. My cousin vanished from there last winter. He came back, but he was changed." Raiskin felt a jolt. Lirali's seriousness, her poise, and the way she seemed both part of the academy and somehow apart from it. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that both had secrets to keep. Miranel nudged Raiskin gently, but he barely noticed, entranced by the new girl's presence. As the bell rang and the older students drifted away, Raiskin found himself glancing back at Lirali. The shadow of Malachar was growing, but so too was something else, a spark that, even now, felt both exhilarating and perilous. As the mess hall emptied, Raiskin took a breath and approached Lirali. "I know this might sound odd," he began, voice careful, "but would you consider joining our group? We're researching the Academy's hauntings, especially the East Wing. We could use someone with your experience." Lirali studied him, her silver eyes unreadable. For a moment, Raiskin wondered if she would dismiss him as another superstitious first year, but then her lips curled in a half-smile. "Most people just want to hear ghost stories," she said quietly. "You look like you're searching for the truth, a stranger. All right, I'll help. On one condition: you tell me why you're really interested." Miranel and Tavern exchanged glances, surprised but hopeful. Raiskin hesitated, then nodded. "It's not just curiosity," he confessed. "We think something real is stirring again, something connected to Malachar. We're not only in danger, the whole academy could be." Lirali's expression grew grave. "Meet me by the observatory after dusk," she said, lowering her voice. "If you truly want answers, you'll have to risk more than you know." As she moved away, Raiskin's heart raced, not only from fear, but from the undeniable draw he felt to her, as if fate itself had placed them on the same path. As dusk painted the Academy's towers in violet and gold, Raiskin slipped from his dormitory with his journal tucked safely under his arm. His heart pounded, both with apprehension about Malachar and the anticipation of meeting Lirali beneath the observatory's spire. He found her waiting in the shadow of the dome, her silver hair glinting in the fading light, the stars just beginning to emerge above them. Lirali greeted him with a quiet, knowing smile. The night air felt charged, as if the two of them standing together might draw the attention of more than just the constellations. "You brought your journal," she noted approvingly. "Good. If we're to face what's coming, we need to trust each other with truths." They sat on the cold stone steps, sharing secrets under the watchful gaze of the heavens. Raiskin spoke of the failed summoning, of the chilling presence in his mind, and the pact he'd made with Miranel and Tavern. Lirali, in turn, confessed her own fears to her cousin's haunted return. The warnings whispered by her family, her sense that the Academy's darkness was far older than any student. As the night deepened, they found themselves drawn together by more than shared danger. In the hush between their words, Raiskin realized he was falling for her, not just for her beauty, but for the fierce, lonely courage that matched his own. The moment was fragile, precious, and already shadowed by the threat that loomed over them both. Raiskin took a shaky breath and let his guard fall completely. He told Lorali about the dreams that had begun since the summoning, about how Malachar's whisper sometimes echoed through his mind when he was alone, urging him to give in to anger or fear. "It's not just the academy I'm worried about," he said quietly. "Some days I feel like I'm losing parts of myself. I'm afraid there won't be anything left but that voice." For a long moment, Lorali was silent. Then, with a gentleness that surprised him, she placed her hand on his. "You're not alone, Raiskin. My cousin tried to face it alone, and it nearly destroyed him. Promise you'll trust me, even if things get worse. We'll fight this together." The warmth of her touch was a balm against the cold shadow inside him. In that moment, under the starlit dome, Raiskin felt a sense of hope he hadn't known in weeks. He squeezed her hand, and a spark of something fierce and bright leaped between them. Something that, despite the darkness, might become love. But as they parted, the moonlight revealed a figure watching from the observatory's far side. A tall, bearded man in noble robes, his expression thunderous. Lorali's eyes widened. "My father," she whispered. "You have to go. Now." With a final, desperate squeeze of Loralia's hand, Raiskin melted into the observatory's deepening shadows. He skirted the moonlit columns, a heart racing as Loralia's father strode forward, his gaze fixed on his daughter. Raiskin kept to the darkness, barely daring to breathe, and slipped down a winding stair at the back of the dome, the hush of night swallowing his footsteps. Once at the base, he paused, looking up through a lattice of stone and glass. Lorali's silhouette stood outlined in silver, her father's voice a low, angry murmur on the wind. Raiskin's chest ached. He wanted nothing more than to run back to her side, to defend her from whatever storm was coming. But the risk was too great for her, for himself, for the fragile trust they'd just built. With heavy steps, he returned to the dormitories, his mind spinning with worry and longing. The memory of Loralia's touch lingered like a promise and a warning. A stranger was, and the whisper of Malachar in the back of his mind was sharper than everything you care for can be lost. He strangely stared out into the night, torn between hope and dread, not yet realizing that this was only the first of many times he would be forced to choose between his heart and the darkness that pursued him. Raiskin sat in his darkened dormitory, the journal open on his lap and a single candle casting trembling shadows on the walls. He poured out his thoughts in messy, urgent lines. How Lorali's touch had been a lifeline, how he feared Malachar was slowly erasing him, how every joyful moment now came with the lurking threat of loss. He wrote of the observatory, the stars, the hope he'd felt when Lorali squeezed his hand, and the bone-deep fear when her father arrived. He remembered the look on Loralia's face as they parting fear for him, but also a fierce, unspoken promise. On the next page, Raiskin drew the sigil of the warding ritual, memorizing every line, and beneath it wrote it, "If I lose myself, let this be the map back to who I was." As the candle sputtered low, He felt the chill of Malachar's presence in the back of his mind, a subtle, mocking pressure that never quite left. Yet beneath it, the memory of Lirali's kindness glimmered. Raiskin resolved to fight for her, for himself, and for the friends who had trusted him with their fears. He closed the journal, whispered the cantrip to seal it, and finally let sleep claim him. In his dreams, he saw Lirali waiting beneath the stars, and the shadow of Malachar circling ever closer. The first rays of dawn found Raiskin already out, skirting the dew-soaked lawns and empty corridors of the academy. He circled the observatory, searching for a sign of Lirali, anything to suggest she'd slipped her father's watchful eye. His heart leapt when he saw her on a bench beneath the budding apple trees, her silver hair unbound and glistening in the morning sun. She rose as he approached, worry etched into her features. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "My father's furious. He's already spoken to the headmaster. I don't know how much longer I'll be allowed to stay, or if we'll be allowed to speak again." Raiskin stepped closer, desperate to hold on to the fragile connection between them. "Whatever happens, I won't let Malachar, or anyone, take you from me. I'll fight for you, Lirali. For us." Her eyes glistened, and for a heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them, a promise made in the hush before a storm. A bell clanged in the distance, signaling the start of classes. Lirali pulled back, her voice trembling. "Go, before someone sees. But remember, hope can be a shield, even when it feels like a lie." Raiskin nodded, the ache of separation already burning in his chest as he slipped away, the taste of love and loss sharp on his tongue. Raiskin threw himself into his magical studies with a kind of ferocity he'd never known. He rose before dawn, practicing cantrips and parsing every line of the warding ritual, his heartbreak a sharp edge that honed his focus. Professors began to notice his progress. Spells that once eluded him now snapped to life with crackling precision, and his essays bristled with insight and urgency. But beneath his achievements, a storm of longing and worry raged. Each night, he returned to the hidden alcove, copying arcane diagrams and notes from memory, determined to master every nuance of Malachar's banishment. Miranel and Tavern tried to draw him out, but Raiskin became more distant, obsessed with protecting what remained of his heart. And, somehow, with proving himself worthy of Lirali. His dreams, though, were another battlefield. Malachar's voice grew bolder, threading through visions of Lirali's face and the cold corridors of the academy. Sometimes, in the gray light before waking, Raiskin couldn't tell if it was his own fear or the spirit's hunger that drove him onward. Yet the pain also steeled him. Each incantation, each sleepless hour, became both a shield against Malachar and a silent message to Lirali. Wherever she was, Oki will not surrender, not to darkness, not to despair. After days of tireless study, Raiskin approached Professor Nevrin after class, choosing his words with care. "Professor, I've been researching advanced banishment and warding magic," he said, holding up his notes on planar breaches and incomplete rituals. Some of the older texts mention spirits that can linger or influence the mind. Are there countermeasures for a student who fears an accident has made them vulnerable? Hypothetically, of course. Neverin's expression grew thoughtful, then grave. The most effective banishments are those performed with a circle of trust. Magic is weaker when wielded alone against entities that prey on isolation. Discipline, clarity of mind, and the support of others matter as much as the ritual itself. There are advanced wards, but they come with risk. Without guidance, you might invite the attention of the very thing you wish to repel. He lowered his voice. Should you, or any student, ever feel truly threatened by a lingering presence, you must seek help. Secrets make you easy prey. But if you are determined to face this on your own, focus on the rituals that anchor your sense of self-memories, friendships, even love. These are shields as real as any spell. As Raiskin left, Neverin pressed a slip of paper into his hand, inscribed with a simple protective incantation. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, Raiskin felt less alone, and more determined than ever to hold fast against the darkness, for himself and for Lorelei. In the quiet of his room, Raiskin drew the curtains and traced the incantation Professor Neverin had given him. He lit a single candle and arranged his journal, the family locket, and a folded scrap of Loralei's handwriting beside him, tokens of memory and hope. Closing his eyes, he spoke the words, feeling the weave of magic tighten around his heart, holding close the image of Loralei's hand in his, her fierce promise echoing in his mind. At first, the spell felt like a gentle warmth, a barrier of light pressing back against the crawling cold that haunted his dreams. But as he focused, Malicher's presence stirred, a ripple of hunger, a whisper of doubt. Raiskin forced himself to remember laughter in the library, the courage in Miranel's voice, the trust in Tavern's eyes. Most of all, he remembered Loralei's touch, her whispered vow to fight beside him. The pressure receded, and for a moment Raiskin felt unburdened, as if the spirit's claws had loosened from his soul. Yet as the candle guttered, he knew this reprieve was temporary. Malicher was patient, testing every shield for weakness. Still, the incantation had worked, anchoring him, if only for a little while, in the person he refused to lose. He resolved to share this small victory with his friends, and, if he could, with Lorelei. For the first time in weeks, Raiskin faced the coming night not with dread, but with a fragile, defiant hope. Determined to strengthen the fragile armor around his mind, Raiskin returned to the library, this time focusing on the oldest grimoires of mind and soul magic. He pored over musty volumes by candlelight, tracing the lineage of Neverin's protective incantation. The deeper he read, the more he realized the charm was but a fragment, rooted in ancient rituals meant to bind the self against hungry spirits, but often only a stopgap. In a marginal note, he found a klug. The original ward, called the Anchor of Memory, was designed to be renewed daily with tokens of the caster's life. Letters from loved ones, a cherished trinket, or the memory of a moment when hope seemed strongest. The more personal the anchor, the stronger the defense. But the ritual's true power came when performed with another, someone trusted. It created a bond that dark spirits like Malicher found nearly impossible to breach. Raiskin's heart raced at the realization he needed Miranel, Tavern, or, most of all, Lorelei to make the protection last. Alone, he could only buy himself time. With trembling hands, he copied the full ritual into his journal, swearing not to let isolation be Malachur's weapon. As he closed the book, Raiskin made a choicing he would reach out to his friends, and to Lorali if he could. Only together, bound by trust and love, could they hope to survive the darkness that pressed ever closer. Raiskin gathered the family locket, Lorelai's note, and a childhood keepsake. A faded ribbon his mother once tied around his wrist for luck. Lighting a new candle, he drew the full anchor of memory ritual in salt and chalk on the dormitory floor. Alone he spoke the ancient words, weaving each personal token into the circle, focusing on memories so vivid they burned Lorelai's laughter, Myronel's illusions, Tavern's steadfast courage, the love and hope that had carried him this far. As he finished the final incantation, the air shimmered with a warm, golden light. The hunger of Malachar pressed against the barrier, testing, but this time it faltered, unable to slip past the web of friendship and love. Raiskin felt both exhausted and uplifted, his soul anchored, if only for a night, in the bonds he'd forged. Yet when the magic faded, a pang of loneliness returned. The ritual was stronger, but not whole. He could sense, deep down, that Malachar was waiting for the moment when Raiskin's heart would be most vulnerable. When separation from Lorelai and isolation from his friends would leave cracks for the darkness to seep through. He resolving next time he would not face it alone. The true shield was not magic but trust. Tomorrow he would tell Myronel and Tavern everything, and try, somewhere and somehow, to reach Lorali again before it was too late. Raiskin found Myronel and Tavern in their hidden alcove after classes, his journal and ritual notes in hand. He explained all he'd learned about the anchor of memory, how it required not only tokens of the self, but the presence and trust of friends to truly hold back Malachur's hunger. Myronel's eyes shone with hope, while Tavern nodded with sober resolve. Together, they gathered their own anchors, Myronel's illusionist's charm, Tavern's battered training wand, a trio of shared memories whispered into the circle. They drew the ritual on the floor, linking hands as the candle's glow flickered in the dusk, and their voices intertwined, an invocation of friendship, laughter, and the promise to never let the darkness find them alone. As the spell took hold, Raiskin felt a surge of strength far greater than anything he'd conjured alone. Malachur's presence recoiled, unable to breach the web of bonds they'd woven. For a moment he glimpsed the vision Lorali, standing in a sunlit corridor, her eyes warm with pride. The ache of separation softened, replaced by the certainty that love and trust were shields Malachar could not easily break. When the ritual ended, the three friends embraced. Whatever dangers the Academy or Malachur brought next, they would face it together, bound by more than magic and stronger for it. That night, Raiskin, Myronel, and Tavern gathered in their alcove, plotting how to find Lorali despite the barriers set by her father and the headmaster. Myronel suggested using her illusion magic to slip into the fourth-year dorms and ask around, while Tavern proposed bribing a friendly house elf for news. Raiskin, however, had a bolder idea. The old enchanted message mirrors in the Academy's unused West Wing. once used by students for clandestine meetings, might still work. They decided to split their efforts. Tavern would try to learn Loralia's new schedule from the kitchen staff. Morano would scout the upper halls under a veil of illusion, and Raiskin would attempt to activate one of the message mirrors, hoping to send a private plea to Loralia for a secret meeting. Each plan was risky, but love and desperation lent them courage. Before they parted, they renewed their pact around the anchor of memory, each friend touching the ritual's tokens and whispering a promise to never let Malachar or Academy politics break their bond. The magic shimmered stronger than ever, a tangible thread of hope in the darkness. As he slipped out through the moonlit corridors, Raiskin felt the ache of longing and fear, but also a fierce determination. One way or another, he would find Loralia, and together they would fight for their future, even as the world tried to keep them apart. Under cover of night, Raiskin slipped through the quiet halls to the unused west wing, a place where dust and echoes lingered. He found the message mirror, its surface clouded with age, but still faintly pulsing with dormant magic. Hands trembling, Raiskin drew the old runic circle for activation, using a drop of his own blood to strengthen the connection, an act he'd read about in a forbidden footnote. He whispered Loralia's name, focusing on the H in his heart and the memory of her touch. The mirror shimmered, and at first only darkness stared back, but then slowly a pale image formed at Loralia's face, drawn and tired but unmistakably hers. Her eyes widened in shock, and then relief. Raiskin. How? I had to try, he said urgently. We're not alone. Morano and Tavern are with me. We've found a way to fight the darkness, but I need you for the ritual to last. Are you safe? Can you meet? Loralia glanced over her shoulder, fear and longing mingling in her expression. I'll try to escape tomorrow after Vespers. Wait for me in the old greenhouse. And Raiskin, don't let go. Not of me, not of hope. The mirror faded, the connection fragile and fleeting, but Raiskin's resolve burned brighter than ever. He would risk everything for love, even as fate tried to keep them apart. On the morning of the secret meeting, Raiskin found Morano in the alcove before classes. With urgency and hope, he described Loralia's plan to slip away after Vespers, and the risk that she'd be recognized by spies or prefects. Morano considered, then nodded, her face set in determination. I can craft an illusion to mask her features, she said. But it must be subtle. Too much glamour will draw suspicion. I'll weave a harmless disguise, a scatter-brained herbology student, always late and always overlooked. That evening, as dusk fell and the greenhouse windows bloomed with golden light, Morano slipped inside first, scattering a handful of rose petals and whispering the illusion into being. The magic rippled outward, ready to cloak Loralia's silver hair and proud bearing in the guise of an ordinary girl. Tavern kept watch outside, his wand tucked up his sleeve, ready to raise an alarm if anyone approached. Raiskin waited, heart pounding, until he saw Loralia slip through the hedges. When she stepped into the greenhouse, Miranel's illusion settled over her like a gentle veil. Loralia squeezed Raiskin's hand, gratitude and longing in her eyes. A stranger, as the three friends encircled her with the tokens and runes of the anchor of memory. For one brief, shining hour, hope and love won out over fear. Yet even as they completed the ritual together, a shadow moved among the academy's upper windows, a silent witness to their defiance and a harbinger of the consequences soon to come.